Welcome to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilakuri. My guest today is Kat Dunkle. Kat is an author of the book Is It Safe to Die? She is also the founder of Customer Research Inc., an internationally recognized marketing and research corporation. She has been the focus of many articles on women in business and interviewed for multiple television documentaries and books on near death experiences. And she is here today with us to share her near death experience and her
Yes.
wisdom. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us today, Kat. Good morning to you, and it's afternoon here on the East Coast.
Oh,
I know you're joining us from the Pacific West. And so, without wasting any more time, Kat, please walk us through. I know you've had a major transformation in your life. You used to be an atheist, and now you believe in God. So, can you walk us through that transformation and your near death story?
yes, I'd like to. I think growing up, I did believe in God as a little child and was very faithful. My parents didn't go to church. My father was a very angry, abusive man, and my mother was a well-educated person, but wanted to be the perfect wife and would go along with whatever he did or would shy away from any controversy. So as a kid, we weren't allowed to talk to him. We weren't allowed to laugh or make noise that disturbed him. And he was extremely abusive to my brother, not as much to me, but that almost was bad because I adored my brother. He was just a year older than I was. And then my dad would be so abusive to him and then come put his arm around me and I just would cringe. At 6 years old, I was molested by a man down the street. And as I came home and cowered in my bedroom, my mom came in and I told her what had happened. And she went and told my father, and all sorts of screaming and things went on. And he was going to go kill the man. And my mom called the police. And the police came and interviewed me. And I didn't even know how to describe body parts at that point in my life. I was only 6. And so the policeman was so nice to me and so kind, which was unusual for me coming from a man. And they took me to the police station. Eventually I had to go to court, sitting in a stand there with a man, defense attorney, calling me a liar and telling me that I just made the whole thing up. And I couldn't understand that either. Nowadays, they would never do that to a child. And we were talking back in the 50s, and so that was the case. As I grew into my teen years, I started questioning about God and wondering what that was all about. And I started trying to find any kind of information that would teach me about God or what to believe. I went to a few churches or youth groups and things, and nothing really gelled. I was quite a loner. We moved every 2 years. My father was with the government, and in these moves, you'd have to go into new schools and meet new kids. And it's as a child, that's very frightening. I don't know if you've ever had to do that, but it's scary to walk into a classroom with everybody staring at you. So I became very self-conscious, withdrawn little girl, and as I grew into my teens, like I say, I started questioning God and what life was all about. And I couldn't find any answers. And I became very rebellious. I started drinking at a very young age, and I did things that the bad girls do. I just was rebellious and not a good girl. And so that rebellion led into my eventually meeting this man that worked next door gas station, and I was working as a waitress and eventually we got together. I became pregnant out of wedlock and had to marry this man at the request of my parents that insisted. He was an alcoholic, and my parents both were alcoholics, so this was pretty normal to me. I was no different than my dad, really. He again was abusive, drank all the time. We had no money, lived in poverty. The FBI came to the door one time because he was writing checks, and I didn't even know what that meant. But then I had another son right after this son, so I had these two little boys. They were just like, I think, 1 and 2 years old, and a little more than that, I guess. But anyway, life was just unbearable, just horrible. I remember going out in the living room one night and looking up at, we lived in Kansas City at the time, and looking up at the sky and thinking, oh God, if you're really up there, if you just give me 1 year to know what true love is or what it's like just to be loved by somebody, then you can do anything to me. You can just kill me, take me away, whatever you need to do. And so I walked away from the window that night because I knew God did not exist. By that time, I was pretty much just a non-believer. Nothing had ever clicked with me. I never understood anything. I had tried. I had gone to every church like imaginable, every faith. I was prime for any kind of cult I would have joined. Just give me something to believe in, but nothing really gelled, and I didn't believe. So I was here stuck in Kansas City with these two little babies and a drunk husband that was abusing me, hit me with a baseball bat, uh, hit me in the face and knocked my teeth through my lip, and it was awful. I just packed up the boys one day and in an old beat up car, and I just took off from Kansas City, driving towards Seattle where my parents had moved. And that was quite a trip. But when we arrived there, my parents helped me get into government housing. We had no furniture, we had no food to eat, we had no money. I got a job at an auto dealership, and women didn't make much. We're talking about in the 60s, and car dealerships were a place of, I don't know, it was bad back then. I mean, salesmen, the lowest form of humans on earth. I mean, they would go after a customer and sell them for the commission and didn't care how they did it or what means or whatever. They had horrible reputations. At this car dealership, one day I sat down and I called a service customer that was having service work done on his car, and asked him how he liked the work that was done. And I got an earful. And so I took this information into the owner of the dealership, who absolutely went crazy. And he said, I want you to start doing this full time. And he put his office right next to mine. And so I had this good job, but it still didn't pay enough. And I asked him one day if I could sell cars, because maybe I could make enough money then to support the boys and myself. And I was able to put together some furniture and make a little home for us. And we had a gas stove that heated our unit, and it had a little flame down below the gas stove. And we were in sleeping bags on the floor at the time, and we'd see that little fire and pretend that we were camping. And so the boys loved it. I mean, they'd go through the house, they couldn't break anything. And we go to the library and we go down to the lake and feed the ducks. And so we were happy. I actually think that was the happiest I was in my life. And I had this pretty good job, but like I say, it didn't pay well. Well, the owner let me sell cars, and I went out onto the sale floor and I sold a car within the first hour, and all the men walked off the floor and wouldn't work with a woman. And that's the way things were back in the 60s. And so I just sat down and started calling these customers from the service department. And some of them had really a lot of mileage on their cars. So I'd ask if they thought about trading it in. And so I was getting prospects for the salesmen, and I was helping with complaints that were happening. And my thought was, well, if you make these customers happy, they'll be repeat customers and you won't have to advertise so much. They will tell what their friends and their relatives about how good the dealership is. And the car dealer just thought this was the best thing he had ever heard in his life. So that was fine. And so life was, like I say, settled down for us. We're doing pretty well until my ex-husband came back and right into our house. And of course, my oldest son then was about 3, and he was so excited to see his daddy. And I mean, he asked me, are we ever going to have a daddy? We're daddy. And I was at the laundromat one time, and a man came in, and Chris ran up to him and asked him, will you be my daddy? And, so when Al Wheeler came into our lives again and was in our house, and I just, well, I give up, and life's going to always be like this. And I got pregnant again, and I thought, I can't do this. I have to do something. I have this good job. I have the boys to support. Al Wheeler's a drunk, and I, by this time, had got him out of our lives. But here I was pregnant again. And so I got an abortion. It was in an old barn, with a man. I didn't know if he was even a doctor or not, no anesthetic. screaming to the top of my lungs through the whole thing and saying, I'm going to pass out. And he said, good, good. And have regretted that horrible mistake my entire life, the guilt that I have for killing that baby, and the words that that doctor, or I don't know if he was even a doctor, said to me that this is a healthy little boy. And I will to my grave with that guilt, even though I've asked God to forgive me. I don't forgive myself for that. So we did go on there. The job was good. I was back to work. The boys were happy. I had a nice grandma type lady that watched them. And a lady that I worked with came up to me one day and said, I've met the man you're going to marry. And I said, I know I have been through way too much to even think about that. That's not going to happen. But that night, a man called me in a very wonderful voice. His name was Don, and asked me out for coffee. And I just said yes for some reason. Well, when I saw him, something just clicked inside of me. I thought, this wonderful, kind person. And we met each other every single night for 17 days. And on the 17th night, we met, and a man that Don worked with came in, and he was just falling down drunk. And he staggered up to us and he said, you together, what would it take for you to get married? And Don said, we go to Reno and get married tonight. Well, I was shocked. I mean, I in my wildest dreams that he would ever think anything of me. I had these two children. I'd imagine he was so handsome, and he was kind and gentle, and had his own house and had a nice car. And what in the world did he want with me? But I saw the shock. And then I got scared to death, because for the first time in my entire life, I felt love for somebody. I loved him. I mean, everything was so perfect, and I loved him. But this that I'd never experienced before was just overwhelming. And so I agreed, and we took the boys to the grandma lady's house, and we went to Reno, and we were married on 18 days after we had met each other. And I know everybody thinks that's crazy, that I was absolutely a nut, but we've been married now for 58 years. And he's still that wonderful man, and we've been through an awful lot, but I have never regretted that move in my life. And he took on these two little boys, and we had another son together, and the boys were wonderful. Well, Don, then right after we got married, he wanted to buy this tavern with a friend of his, and I was so against it, because I was against alcohol at this. Life had been nothing but misery for me. But I couldn't him from his dream, and didn't want to, so he bought this tavern with a friend, and we went out on our first anniversary. I'll tell you, that first year that we were together, I would open, and there would be crystal and china and things that he'd collected when he was in the Navy, and this beautiful house, and the boys had a daddy, and life could not have been better. And for the entire year, he never raised his voice to me. He was kind and gentle and loving, and to both my boys and myself. And like back when I made that vow to God, you'll give me 1 year of happiness, then you can take my life, do what you want. Well, be careful when you make vows to God, because that night on our first anniversary, we got married in February, 18 days after we met each other. That night we went out to a wonderful dinner to celebrate our anniversary. And he wanted to stop by this tavern that he'd bought and just see how things were going. And so I agreed. I was a little miffed, because I didn't want to ruin this wonderful night. But we went there, and there was a barmaid there that was obviously flirting with him and flipping her hair towards him, and he was fixing her necklace, and I just became more angry, and more this went on, and pretty soon I just couldn't take anymore, and I just got up and ran out the door without my coat or my purse or anything, and it was raining in February. I went running down the street, and a man pulled over and said, "Lady, would you like a ride?" And I said, "Yes, thank you," and hopped in the car with a total stranger. And I believe he was an angel, because he never said a word. He just drove me around, and I was crying. And pretty soon he said, "Would you like to go home now?" And I said, "Yes." So he took me home. And as I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, Don was at the door just furious with me. And we got in our very first fight exactly 1 year after we had met each other. So after that, things kind of slid downhill. I was a very insecure person, and my insecurities just flowed out of me. And I gained weight and I cut my hair too short. And it was like things just weren't the same. We started bickering and arguing a little bit. Well, I never worked at the tavern except for 1 day a week. We had this big promotion, a big crab feed with a discount. Like I can't remember what the price was, but it was really low. And I would work that one night. So it was in April 6th, and got ready to go to work and kiss the boys goodbye and had a babysitter there. I left for work, and as I walked, it was a beautiful spring night. I can remember smelling the beautiful flowers and hating the fact I had to go into this smoky place. And I got there and I walked inside the door, and Don was intently talking on the phone. And I thought, why is he talking on the phone? The place was just overflowing with people, and he was bent over this intense conversation. He hung up the phone and came over and grabbed my arm and was pulling me out the door, saying words that I just didn't really understand. That my youngest son, Mark, had been hit by a car and we needed to get to the hospital. So we went to the hospital, and as we drove in, the ambulance drove in, and they took Mark out of the ambulance, and he was still and quiet. And a doctor came running out and saying, "How did this happen?" And I said, I don't know how this happened. And we were led into a room, and Mark was taken away, and I would hear this loud going, code blue, and rush into Mark's room. And a nurse came out and asked me if I would call a priest. And I said, "I'm not going to call a priest. I don't want a priest here. I want you to fix my son. I don't want a priest interfering." Excuse me. And they went back in the room. Pretty soon a priest did come, and I grabbed his arm and said, "Don't go in there. I don't want you getting in their way. They're working. Son, please don't go there." But he walked right past me into the room, and they shut the door. And then he came out, and we just through the night we were waiting and listening to all the sounds of the hospital. And I didn't pray. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't believe in God. And or anything of that sort had never appealed to me or never done anything. I would say I was very much a non-believer. I don't know if I'd call me an atheist or not, but I guess it was an agnostic. I wanted to believe in God, but I did not. So then towards morning, I was walking down the hall, and I came to this window, and I saw lights coming on in houses. And I thought to myself, don't these people know what's happening in this hospital, that babies are being born and children are being born into this world and they're dying, and how can life just go on when this is happening? How can this be? And the cars were people going to work, just a normal day for everybody, but it certainly wasn't normal for us. And then I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I guess knew what they were going to say. And the doctor told us that they couldn't save Mark. We went into Mark's room, and I saw a tear in his eye. And I leaned down to kiss him and told him, "Mark, everything's going to be fine. Mommy's here." And because mommy could fix everything, but mommy couldn't fix this. And I pulled the covers up on because he seemed so cold, and I was just frozen. I fell into a chair next to Mark, hanging on to him, and they let me out. My legs wouldn't work. I couldn't walk. I was like rubber legs. And we got into the car, and I didn't want to go home. I didn't know what to do, where to go, what, how does it go on now? Because I could not stand it. I couldn't stand the pain. I just couldn't believe it even at this point. Eventually we did go home, and poor Chris was with Mark. They had gone up to this busy road that they were forbidden to go by, and there was a little store across the street, and Mark had been kind of playfully jumping towards cars like he was going to go in the street, and they would stop for him. And this car stopped, and he started into the road, and a car on the other side came speeding by and hit him. And Chris went running out there, Marky, are you? And his eyes were open, but he didn't. And little Chris home, other people came to Mark, and Chris walked home and told the babysitter what had happened. And so Chris saw this whole thing, and here he was, just this child himself, and And his life never the same after that. He went into, I don't know, he went through all sorts of things and emotions and problems. And it was very, very difficult, and tried to get so much help for him, but nothing could help. And myself too. I mean, I day in the house, I was frozen. I mean, I would go forth, and like I say, I could pray. I didn't know what that was all about even. And I just would stare out the window. I would have horrible flashbacks and thoughts, and I could not live. And a friend had taken little Dusty, who was just a baby at the time, and I just don't even know, couldn't tell you really what was going on in our lives right then. But I guess people would come and try to console us, but certainly nothing would ever console me again. And I guess a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month into this, John told me that I had to out of the house. I had to move, and I had to start living life again. And I argued with him. I mean, we pretty arguing most of the time, if we ever did even speak. And he said, "You have got to get out, and we're going over to some friend's house tonight. That won't be difficult. You need to do that." So as the time came, we started arguing about it, and he was hanging on to me and kind of leading me door, and I was fighting with him. And we got in the car, and the fighting escalated into yelling. And he started the car, and we're driving down the road, and pretty soon, he said to me, "Kat, you have to move on." And I went crazy. I mean, I just I'll never, ever move on. And I came across the car just wailing away at him, his face, and scratching it, hitting as hard as I could. Just all the frustration that had built in me came just barreling out onto him. And he took his arm and went like that to knock me over to my side of the car. And as he did it, I just saw stars, and I just was shocked. And I just sank down in the seat. And I said, "Take me home." And he did. We went home, and he walked in the bathroom and was splashing water in his face. And I got car keys, and I took off, because that's what I always did when I got cornered, was to run. And I started just driving wildly down the freeway, and it was pouring down rain. And I had this pain inside of me that was so intense that I had to pull over. And I got out of the car all bent over, and the cars are going by honking at me and splashing water, and the rain's, I'm soaking wet. And the pain was so intense, I thought, I have to get home. Something's really bad wrong with me. So I got behind the wheel of the car, and I couldn't tell you how I got home, but I did. And as I drove up the driveway, Don was absolutely furious with me out the door, yelling at me. And I got past him, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I have to call an ambulance. Something's really wrong with me. I have a horrible pain." And he said, "Well, if you're that bad, I'll take you to the hospital." And he did. And back then they didn't have MRIs or CAT scans to find out what internally was wrong with me, but the pain was so intense that they did all these blood tests, I guess, and knew that my blood count was dropping drastically. And the doctors came in and said, "We need to take you into surgery. You're bleeding internally. We don't know why." And so they put me on a gurney, and I'm going down the hall thinking, I don't even know these doctors, or what they're going to do to me. Am I going to live? What's wrong with me? And I saw the tiles in the ceiling going by really fast. And all of a sudden the gurney stopped, and Don leaned over me and told me that he loved me. And I thought, he loves me. I didn't think he even liked me anymore, let alone loved me. But I clung to that as they took me into surgery. And then I felt the doctors and saw them putting a mask over my face, and everybody, they were all masked, and I knew I was going into surgery, and everything just got really dark, but I was still conscious. I was awake. I knew what was happening, but sound completely went away. It was very, very quiet, and very, very, very black dark. Myself being pulled through a, I don't know, something. I was a structure or anything, but just kind of pulled through this and into a hallway. And down below me, I could see Dawn and the two boys standing around a lamppost, and they were crying because I had died. And I said, "No, I'm not okay. I don't know what's happening, but I'm okay. I'm okay." And the thought came to me, they're going to be just fine. And then I felt myself move on. I felt comfortable. Okay, they're going to be fine. And then off to my left, I saw 4 human figures dressed in street clothes. I have no idea who they were. I don't know, could have been distant relatives or something. I don't know. I didn't recognize them. And they looked worried for me, this worried look on their face, like something terrible was about to happen to me. And I was confused by that, but I just moved on, going down this hallway. And all of a sudden, I've heard this horrendous noise, like a freight train was barreling over the top of me. This noise, which is just louder than anything I'd ever heard. And I felt like a burning sensation of maybe a rope pulled through the middle of me, just a million miles an hour. All of this happening all at once. And I had this thought, there is no God. And then it all stopped and it was perfectly quiet and I knew that up to this point, I had not believed in God. I really did not believe in God. But now I knew, and I was so excited. It was like this was something, a question I would have always wanted to answer my entire life, but never was answered. God exists and he's real. I mean, I didn't see God, but I had this knowledge of knowing. I mean, there's not anybody on earth that could tell me that's not my hand. That is my hand. And that's the knowing that I knew God existed. There was no doubt, nothing, just exciting exhilaration, the peace that passes any understanding, the knowledge, the excitement, the thrill of peace that just was incredible peace. I was just in euphoric state of incredible peace. And then noise came again, and I was headed towards a brilliant light. I thought it was this brilliant light, and then came again, and pulling through my chest, and the thought came to me, there is, all of a sudden I knew again, without any doubt, heaven was an actual place, and I was headed towards there. And I have to tell you that even leaving my husband, my children, my life, and going to this place was so intense that I could leave that without any thought. That was all that mattered, that I would be going to heaven, that God was real, that this was the most exhilarating sensation I ever felt. It was incredible. And just as I was about to enter into this place, the bottom dropped out and I heard the noise again. I felt the pulling through my chest and the thought came, there is no hell. And all of a sudden I was falling into total darkness. And I was in hell. I didn't know where. I mean, people see demons and things, see anything but total darkness. I'm falling. And I knew he had not sent me there. I knew that for a lifetime I had denied God. I had made fun of God. I had these terrible things in the name of God. And I knew that I had made that choice. I had made that choice through my life to not believe in God, that I had a choice, but I didn't choose God. And I felt myself falling. I knew nobody could save me. I felt like nobody even knew I was there. Probably God didn't even know I was there. I was going to fall in total darkness forever and ever. Could place. Nobody could save me. Nobody knew I even existed. That God didn't even maybe know I existed, but of course he did. Screaming, God, I believe in you. I know you're real. I know you exist. I know heaven is real. I'm sorry, God, for my sins. Forgive me for turning away from you. I was pleading and begging God to help me. But I knew that God shut himself off. He didn't enter into this place. He didn't know I was there. And I can't even explain the horror that I felt or that I experienced. And then all of a sudden it stopped and I felt myself going backwards and I felt some hope, some relief. And I came back into the tunnel and I came back to the entrance of where the tunnel was. And I heard a voice say, bring people to me. I believed it was the voice of God. And then I felt, this is hard to explain, I felt the will to live enter back into me. It was an actual thing that when you die, and your spirit leaves you, your will to live leaves you. You don't have that desire to live anymore. You have the desire to be with God. You have that desire to be in heaven. You have that desire to be with your creator. And when this came to me, this will to live entered back into my body as I came through the wall again and into the operating room. And I, at that point, felt excited I was going to live. And then I when I woke up, I was screaming, God's real, God's real. It put me back under again. So that's what happened to me. From that day on, I have done everything, and it's been over 50 years now. I have done everything in my power to fulfill what I believe God let me live for or allowed me to live for, and that was to bring people to Him. I've written two books now on the subject, and I speak whenever I can, and I want to I want people who are doubting or fearful of death or who've lost loved ones about what could happen. You know, I believe that your loved one didn't know God at the time of death or whatever. I'm not special. I believe God does for everybody what He did for me. So, you know, I hope I do hope in that even we don't know what happens during the dying process when a person is not really dead yet, but the process of death is going through, and maybe they can't speak or whatever. But your prayers, your hope for them is that when God does reveal Himself to them, that they will change. Of course, they will. And I do believe people go to hell. I believe that there are people that are truly evil, that it's their desire to be with their kind, to be with evil, and that's what they want. So, you know, I don't believe it's a great place, but you know, if that's their, like I say, I don't, God sends us there. I don't believe that He's a type of God that sends anybody to hell. I believe it's through choice, and I do believe people make that choice. So that's my story.
That I was listening to your story and just thinking, like, that in my head, like this big rock in the ocean, and all the waves are just coming and crashing on it endlessly, right? You didn't go through one, you went through several challenges. And I just want to appreciate you for your courage to share. 'Cause I know, it's hard to time we share, we kind of go through it heads, but then you kind of relive it as well. So I appreciate you for doing that, Kat.
I'd like to just add one thing too. You know, after this happened, got home and healed, and all I went to sleep one night. And as far as finances, we were pretty destitute at the time. And I went to sleep one night and I had a dream. This was not a near-death experience. This was a real dream. And I kind of envisioned starting what I had done at this car dealer. I figured if he was so excited about this, I'll bet you other car dealers would be excited about it too. And so I went to other car dealers and they just came across the desk at me. Where do I sign up? Where do I sign up? And so the program became very, very successful. And we the business into a multi-million-dollar corporation that's still going strong again today, over 50 years. And my son is running that now, but it afforded us a beautiful lifestyle, and God has been so gracious and so good to us. And so I wanted to add that because I thought, you know, no matter what, God can do miraculous things. I had a high school education. I wasn't the brightest light bulb in the class, you know. Curriculum for me was always kind of foreign. So to be able to start a business, go into business, and be able to be up there with the big boys, you know, and I was business in the car in the 60s and 70s, and which was unheard of. Like I had mentioned before, well, the men walked off the floor when I tried to sell cars. And so women have come a long way in that sense, but was a miracle. That was.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, because that brings a lot of inspiration and hope, Kat. Everything you've been through, then it is a miracle. Just you sitting here talking to me, you're an entrepreneur, there's other things happened. Thank you, thank you. I a question though, because a lot of people that I interview that have had near-death experiences, they talk about and the light and things like that. And then there's a really small percentage of people that do describe like the darkness, the tunnel, void, and there's, I guess the distressing near-death experiences. And I was reading today Nancy Evans Bush. I think she's done a lot of research on this as well. And one of the things I read and she said was that she believes it's somehow connected to the deepest parts of subconscious. Do you think that that's a part of it as well?
I don't know. I
Okay.
guess I couldn't answer that question. I've been in contact with a Dr. Bruce Grayson. He wrote a book called After,
Mhm.
and he comes from a very scientific. He is a professor. He did near-death studies for 30 years and wrote the book. And he interviewed me over a 20-year period. And I'm in his book, page 144. Anyway, became a good friend. At the beginning of my relationship with him, he's not a believer in God. He's a scientific man. And I don't know where he's at now. I can't imagine that he's not a believer in God now because of what people have said. But he gives all the scientific things about near-death experiences and what physiology happens when that happens.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure. There's so much out there, and I think people have to really be careful. I don't group the near-death experience in with things like reincarnation or that. I think it's a separate thing that happens to people.
Mm.
So yeah.
And so that's another question. The title of your book is very intriguing. Is it safe to die? Why did you pick that title?
I picked it because I couldn't even tell you the book that I read. Something about, oh, I know it was. It was I guess even in print. It was called To Hell and Back by Maurice Rawlings. And he in there somewhere has that said that, is it safe to die? And I went, oh my God, that's just what it is. Is it safe to die? So that's why I saw it in a book.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, Kat. I do want to ask you if people wanted to connect with you and they're more interested in your story or your book, what's the best way that they can contact you?
Through my email, and my email's 100 years old, so please forgive me, but it's the cat 17 at AOL.com. So THEKAT 137 at AOL.com. And my book is on is it safe? It's on Amazon, so it can be you can detail in that. But I would welcome any questions from your listeners and love to correspond with them. So please, if you have questions or things that I didn't touch on, please feel free to either, I guess you probably have comments on your show, right?
Yes.
That people can come in. So I would love to answer anything anybody has to ask. So
Thank you, Kat. And I'll make sure to include your links in the show notes so people can email you if they wanted to directly.
great. Yes, that'd be wonderful. I'd love to hear from any of them, especially with any questions they might have.
Thank you. And thank you for taking your time to be on this show.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye bye.